On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode 47, created on June 28th, 2023. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me are Jeff in Minnesota and Neil on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Well, hello, gentlemen. I'm drinking something very outside of my normal. I'm having a Kona Brewing Company Big Wave Golden Ale.
That could not be any more different. So I was in New York and was asking sort of what's hot for beers in New York. And what I'm told is it's all beers that are green. Green is like the hot word in beer right now in New York. So I thought about a Kings County Brewers Collective Gladiator with a lovely, Gladiator, I guess that's what it is. I thought about a Kings County Venomous Villains, but I decided to keep it simple and go with other half all green everything.
Nice. And gentlemen,
Wow.
I'm going old style.
Nice.
All right, you can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast, Green Bay Chat, and just the audio is available on Spotify by searching for Green Bay Chat. We're kind of in the dead zone of the football season here, but we have a few things to talk about, like the draft in Green Bay. Hey, Lot 1 tailgating returns. We saw some OTAs and mini camps here in June, as well as training camp coming up in July. Someone was in Green Bay recently. We'll talk about that. As usual, we have our Packer player of the past and our history report. But the big news, Neil, Jeff, we're already talking about it. We're going to broadcast from it, but it's a long way out. It is the NFL draft. It is official. It is coming to Green Bay.
John, I just need to know what your traffic nightmare scenario situation is, because John can only think of bad things as far as the draft being Green Bay. I think it's going to be phenomenal.
I'm just going to get like a tent, and I think I will camp out by Kroll's and just stay there for 3 days and not have to worry about driving anywhere back and forth. How's that sound?
It sounds in character for you. We can let you take a shower at my parents' house if you wish.
All right, sounds good. But the plan is for the three of us to be in Green Bay when the draft rolls around in almost 2 years. And I don't think they've really even announced where everything is happening yet, but with the renovations that happened around Lambeau Field, there is now an outdoor stage in the Lot 1 area for concerts. I can only imagine that the plan was to use that as a staging area for the draft as well, to be able to keep players within the building or within the underground parking, because it's going to be late April and it could be a bit chilly yet.
Why, yes, it could be chilly, and it's not Kansas City, and it could be 70 and sunny. It could be snowing. So it's
also possible to get all 4 seasons in 4 days in Green Bay.
Yes, it absolutely is. I'm sure they will, there will be some coverage and some, covered areas, and then all the unwashed will be just, rained on or snowed on or both. But I think, I'm excited. I think it's going to be exciting for everyone around Green Bay. Lots of people had a field day with, is this going to actually work in Green Bay? Well, God damn it, it's going to happen, and it's going to work.
It's going to have to work.
It's going to be interesting to see where fans congregate. Obviously, everything around the stadium district is going to be a major component, but people, there aren't that many hotels in the stadium district. So there's going to be plenty of people downtown. I have a feeling that, different teams are going to, or fans of different teams are going to set up, say that, the Lorelei Inn is going to be the Cleveland Browns bar or something like that. I mean, I could absolutely see that, that fans are deciding on specific ththings and rotation. I think it's going to be great, not just for the bars of the stadium district. I think it's going to be great for entertainment throughout the city. And I think that it's going to be fun. Obviously I want to be with the Packers fans, but I sort of want to see how other fans are experiencing it too, because seeing how they celebrate in Green Bay will be interesting and a different twist on how I normally see Green Bay.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And unlike a Super Bowl, which is generally for, VIPs and things like that, this is not, right? I mean, this is more, I would say, for the common folk, but for the casual or the normal fan, or that does not going to go watch, pay $5,000 for a ticket, right?
There's no cost of admission. There's no cost of admission for the draft, right? You just go and show up. So, it is as democratic as it possibly could be.
Could be cost for parking. Certainly that always happens as well. But yeah, it's a matter of where you, like you said, where does everybody go? Not just
Yeah.
where do they stay, but where do they go once they're in and around the area? Because you think about when you were in Nashville, how that was literally right downtown, and there was a lot to walk to. Lambeau Field, kind of like when we were at Highmark Stadium, is in the middle of a neighborhood. There are a few bars and restaurants, but for the most part, there's not a lot. There's not enough, I should say, to give everybody some sort of respite if they wanted to get away from the action.
Right. But again, going back to Nashville, that was a walkable thing. And Uber drivers, I think, are going to make a lot of money over the course of those 3 days because Green Bay is not the most walkable city other than, little tiny areas that are not going to accommodate everyone. So,
Yeah.
but I think that that's part of the entertainment as well. And hopefully it's something that will be thought carefully about in the planning that goes on in the next 2 years.
Well, you have to presume that planning that has started, right? And they're weighing different options, right? Are we going to utilize the inside of the stadium in the bowl? Are we going to use the atrium? Are we going to use, like I said, the stage outside? And they, quite frankly, just rebuilt an expo center. They tore down the Brown County Arena, the Veterans Memorial Arena, that whole
Oh, they
Resch
did?
Center. Yeah,
Oh,
the Resch Center. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. You haven't been around in a while, but the Resch
no.
Center and the old Shopko Hall, the Shopko Hall or the Expo Center has been redone.
Okay.
So it certainly provides an indoor
Yeah.
availability, at least for, if you're thinking about player comfortability, because you need a green room, you need something that you've got the number one draft picks coming to town. They want to get wined and dined. They don't want to be sitting outside freezing their ass off.
That's why I think that the actual draft is going to be inside Lambeau Field. I know that's not the normal way that they do it, but the space is just more appropriate in Green Bay using Lambeau and taking advantage of that. And I think you think about how the NFL wants to be able to use that. Lambeau in the background is good. Lambeau being the center of everything is even better. I just think it's going to market best.
Well, sure, because you can fit, I don't know what they fit a concert in there, maybe, 60, 70,000 easily in the bowl and plus the suites and everything. So yeah, you can get more people outside. They'll put screens up outside, things like that. Then you can get another, 50 or more thousand, maybe 100,000 outside as well. So, there you go. There's your couple 100,000 almost in that general vicinity. I'm sure there'll be time to, like, where Aaron's Hill is and things like that, kind of that. They're still developing that. So yeah, and like John said, the Resch Center and that area is, inside, if the weather gets a little foul as well, there'll be, there's an arena. So I think it's,
No, no
it'll
matter
come
what
together.
no matter what the decision is, rest assured someone's going to hate it. Someone's going to declare it the worst option that there was. Other people will love it. People will say, "Why didn't we do this? Why didn't we do that?" But again, like I said, I'm certain that the planning has started, that they are
Oh
working
yeah.
on that they're going to run a couple of different scenarios. One of the other things that kind of goes hand in hand with that, with our next topic, with, like I said, Lot One at Lambeau Field. Lot One was under some renovation. They put in underground parking for the players. There's also some underground, like, exercise facilities for the players. There's even a turf field, indoor turf field underground, under, like, the steps, the Oneida Steps.
Wow.
They expanded that. So there's a lot of stuff underneath that we don't see, and that all got completed. But what that does is it reopens Lot One. That means that the big tailgating crew that I'm part of will be back to Lot One this year. And with the conversations that we've already had, we are hoping that Lot One tailgating occurs during the draft as well. So imagine Green Bay tailgates well, and everybody has regular tailgate parties. So imagine all of these parties, all the houses, being open for 3 days straight, or even 4 days, depending on when you consider things start and end. It could be one of the biggest parties ever.
Although you might have to go to lot 9 for your tailgating again, just for the draft, because
Oh, those
I
bastards!
have a feeling that the asphalt space is going to be well occupied during that
Yeah.
time. One of the other things, though, about the draft in Green Bay is that there's been talk about what they're going to do for infrastructure improvements for it, right? So obviously they're going to have shuttle buses all over the place, but they were talking about restoring passenger train service to Green Bay in time for the draft, which is nice, because right now it goes to Milwaukee, and you're basically sort of SOL if you need to get from Milwaukee up, unless you happen to want to take the bus. But yeah, I think the restoration of train service, at least for this period, but also as a tester for future train service in Green Bay and the Fox Valleys, I think is something that's a major positive of the draft being in Green Bay, to sort of force the issue a little bit.
Neil, you're quite a regular train user, and when we talk about Amtrak, what's the feasibility of that? Just grabbing some Amtrak trains and getting them on the right tracks and the existing tracks
I
that
mean,
run between?
yeah, and you don't even really, I mean, it's really making sure that you have stations that are on the rail lines, but fundamentally, you don't even need to have the Amtrak cars are expensive and extremely comfortable. I mean, you could do something like what I just wrote on today on the some of the commuter rails around New York City. And specifically, those trains go 80, 90, 100 miles an hour. That's sort of been my big complaint about high-speed rail. And everyone says, well, we really need high-speed rail. What we really need is a lot of 80 to 100 mile an hour trains that go everywhere, that can do things faster than cars can. And commuter rail trains, commuter rail, all of the things associated with commuter rail are things that are completely feasible. And I could certainly see that we might borrow some things, for example, from Chicago's commuter rail system just for the draft to move some people around. So I think it's really exciting to sort of think about making a better rail infrastructure in Wisconsin. And that's something that would be helpful in a lot of ways.
Can you do that in 18 months with 2 winters in between there as well?
Trains can be, I mean, if there's existing train lines that are still there, yes, you absolutely can do that. So
Okay, I trust you. So we'll wait and see what the civil engineers have to do. The state will get that taken care of, and we may have some temporary service. We'll report on that when we learn more as well. Well, one of the things that didn't bring a lot of people to Green Bay, or at least not as many, I should say, we had OTAs and mini camps in June. Neil, I know you had your finger on the pulse of what these players were doing. We had our new quarterback in, and he looked shiny and ready to go. And rookies came in, and in shells they look good. Everybody looks good in shells, though, don't they?
yeah, but it's still always good to hear the report. So this is the one thing that's different about OTAs and mini camps is regular people like you and me can't go. It's essentially all the media, the only people that are allowed to attend these. So you're getting a lot of things filtered through various media personalities, but they were pretty consistent that, yes, our new tight ends look really good, right? The speed developing and the connection developing between Jordan Love and Romeo Dobbs and Christian Watson, right? Seeing that chemistry develop, talking about some of the really fabulous plays that were made specifically by Watson is what I heard the most of. Of course, there was some discussion about, well, Jordan Love had a few great plays. He had a few stinkers. It sounds a lot like growing pains, but it definitely is not that he's going to be running out of the gate and owning the NFL in week 1, but we sort of expected that. Aaron Rodgers didn't either. So.
Well, he's going to have to, Neil, because we have the Chicago Bears in week 1. So he's got to really think about some type of ownership in week 1.
Yes, he needs to retain that ownership, having been transferred away from Aaron Rodgers.
Speaking of transferred away, there's the concept of the Packers East and some OTAs that happened out that way as well. What are your thoughts on the New York Packers, or whatever we want to call them?
Yeah, Lambeau East and Green Bay East. I guess we can't call them Green Bay East because we've already taken care of that for ourselves. But Packers East is it's kind of remarkable how many people are on the Jets that were previous on the Packers, including Nathaniel Hackett. It's 9 people total that are former Packers that are on that Jets team, and including the recent signing of Adrian Amos. So it's as I said after the draft, I think the biggest thing that we gained in this offseason was trading away general manager Aaron Rodgers. And so whatever, there's definitely some excitement in New York. I was at the Mets Brewers game and yesterday, and there was a lot of discussion among Jets fans, among Mets fans who knew I was a Packers fan as well, as far as, well, what do you think about Aaron Rodgers coming? And there's excitement, but it's not like the town is completely sold on the concept yet. I've not seen just Rodgers jerseys they're out in the wild everywhere. So it's definitely while Aaron's got to prove it, but attending all the OTAs and mini camps for the first time in years and making this very broad statement about how excited he is with this new team and these new opportunities and wanting to grow, wanting to show leadership. A lot of the things that he sort of didn't do at the end in Green Bay, he's showing that. And I think that's the whole Aaron Rodgers with a chip on his shoulder kind of thing. And whether that lasts through the season and he's able to survive at his current age, and have a good season is a different story. But he's certainly saying all of the right things for Jets fans. Maybe not what Packers fans want to hear, but there's definitely excitement there. And the other thing is he's really connecting with his teammates, not just in the football field in the mini camps and OTAs, but actually going out and doing things. So our photo here is of MetLife Stadium, obviously the home stadium for Packers East, or for Lambeau East, as it were. But Aaron Rodgers is actually in that photo somewhere, because this is from the Taylor Swift concert on May 28th that I attended, but Aaron Rodgers attended for the second night. He went to 2 nights of the Taylor Swift concert there, and there were
lucky him.
Tents right down by the stage, and that's where Aaron was. Sort of doing some bad dancing.
Tickets? So wow, that's how did
he's attending OTAs and taking advantage of being in the media center of the world and going to Taylor Swift 2 nights in a row. Well, good for him.
Yeah, he had been out and about in New York too, right after the trade. There were pictures of him out and about with some other players and things like that. So yeah, he seems that he relishes the Big Apple, and I'm sure he's soaking up all the attention.
I mean, there's a photo of him with Taylor Swift and a number of other celebrities right after one of these 2 concerts he attended. So he's definitely in a different media market, a different celebrity market, and he is taking advantage of his time in that in that focus.
Other than that, Neil, how was the Taylor Swift concert?
It was rare. I was there. I remember it all too well. It was absolutely incredible. It's 3.5 magical hours of concert going. The fans, the excitement of the fans, the singing from all of the fans, but all of the tailgating, all of the pregame tailgating that was going on. We showed up 6 hours before the concert, and it was really fun. There were a lot of people that were dressed up for it. There were bracelets that people would trade with other people. It was the most fun I've had sort of at a large concert ever, and it's really not anything close. The Taylor Swift fans are really a lot of fun. They were really into it, and just the number of songs where Taylor's singing, but you've got all of the crowd singing along with, was really pretty magical. They did excellent things as far as lighting was concerned, including lights that you wore on your wrist so they could light up different areas of the stadium. It was done perfectly as far as a concert could be concerned that's at that size. So it was magical, and that's probably why Aaron came back for a second night. So
my daughter was at the Minneapolis concert last week, Neil. She declared now that the concert has ended. She has PTSD, post Taylor Swift depression.
As does everyone who went to a Taylor Swift concert this year. I did as well. And I think I'm just finally getting over it. So.
All right. Well, there's always going to be another chance. You just got to pay the price to get there. All right. So speaking of the Packers East and everything moving eastward, there are still some things moving towards Green Bay. And in fact, the both of you are planning on being in Green Bay. We've got in July coming up, not only training camp, but the shareholder meeting. And we have a personal event going on that weekend as well. Neil, you and I are going to run the Packers 5K that weekend. Lots of big things going on. The 5K, we get to run around a lap on the inside of Lambeau Field for the finish of it. But this will be your first shareholder meeting and the first time to training camp since you were 10 or 12 years old, probably?
Yeah, probably in that ballpark, because but even then, it wasn't a huge thing. You went for the Packers picture day, but I don't remember going out and being a railbird as a consistent thing as a kid. I actually think I was at one maybe about 10 or 12 years ago. I stopped by for a little bit, but I'm really looking forward to the atmosphere, and I think that the excitement of having this new regime in Green Bay is something that's going to be really exciting. It's certainly provided excitement to the offseason, and I think it's going to, as far as there's just going to be a lot more unknowns, which makes it inherently more interesting and intriguing. So I'm looking forward to those elements.
Jeff, are you going to bring your bike to training camp?
No, I hadn't planned on it, but I am looking forward to the shareholder meeting. That is something that, since I bought stock, a decade ago or whatever, I've never actually attended, not only in person, but even because they've been streaming it the last number of years as well. And just never had. And earlier this week, Neil, mentioned, hey, why don't we do this? Well, yeah, that's a great idea. So looking forward to it, hoping for good weather. That would be good. So they can actually, have it in the bowl. That would be nice. But it'll be interesting to see if they have any surprises, or kind of how they, Neil said, with the new regime, how they're going to kind of position this. Obviously, they'll give financials and all that other, stuff, which is obviously extremely important, as we'll talk about in history. But in terms of just, what are they going to offer with because it is a new regime, players and excitement, and with the rookies and things like that. Really looking forward to it.
And the other thing, John, is that the day before the 5K run is when the rookies report. So we'll actually be able to catch that rookies reporting element as well and see the rookies around before the veterans show up. So it's highly fortuitous that our high school reunion is the same weekend that the Packers open, but this is kind of a perfect storm as far as bringing everything together.
Yeah, it's very nice how everything worked out. So that weekend of July 21st, 22nd, through the 24th, and then even thereafter. So we'll talk again on our next show about training camp and the shareholder meeting as well. Speaking of bringing people to Green Bay, being the off season, there's a period of time here, mid-June to mid-July, about 4 to 5 weeks, where the NFL really is in what we call the dead zone. They don't do anything, players don't do anything, and really it's the only time of year that coaches get off. And a former coach, is in the Green Bay area right now. If you listen to WIXX in Green Bay, you've heard him on the morning show with Murphy in the Morning. And I bumped into him on Father's Day. That's right. Coach Mike McCarthy was down in Hollandtown at Van Abel. So one of the things I've been doing lately is I've been bartending on the weekends because that's what I like doing. And on Father's Day, I'm in the bar and I'm walking to the kitchen, and this guy comes walking towards me, and I'm like, hey, that looks like Mike McCarthy. And my brain is like, why would Mike McCarthy be here? And then I remembered his wife, Jessica, is originally from Green Bay. So when I returned to the bar, I walked over by him and his family, and just to make sure that it was him, I said something to him. And as soon as he started talking, his voice was very recognizable. And I said, oh, you are who I thought you were. And I put my hand out and shook his hand, and he said, hey, how you doing? And he said, oh, good. What can I get you to drink? Now, do you guys want to guess? Do you know what it is that Mike McCarthy would have to drink at Van Abel's Supper Club?
Oh boy!
On a Sunday morning, Father's Day.
I'm gonna guess an old fashioned, just because that seems like the right drink to get at a supper club in Wisconsin. So
that is the right drink to get. But the other right drink to get, which he did get, is a Bloody Mary, a nice fully loaded Bloody Mary with vegetables and string cheese on it. In fact, he wasn't sure what he wanted, and it was his father-in-law who had one. He goes, hey, is that a Bloody Mary? He said, yes, it is. I'll have one of those. Okay. So I made him a Bloody Mary. Yes.
The string cheese presentation at Van Abel's is also quite special. It's not sort of your typical just tubular string cheese. It's a very artistic string cheese that's spraying out all over the place. So fine choice by Coach McCarthy.
So I chatted with him a bit. I really just asked him, I said, how's Dallas treating you? And he said, oh, really good, really good. The people are there, really good. So he said a lot of nice things. And I said, oh, well, you're here with your family. I remember your wife is from Green Bay. So thanks for coming back, and hope everybody treats you well when you're here. So if anybody bumps into Coach McCarthy in Green Bay, I hope you guys treat him well. We did. We left him alone. We didn't mob him. And I think that was one of the reasons probably he came down to Southern Brown County, was to get away from people gawking and things like that. And he probably made the right choice, but it was a pleasure to serve him. Great family that he has. And they did what normal people do. They dine at a supper club and enjoyed the rest of their day. So finding Packer coaches, Packer players at supper clubs or places around Wisconsin isn't too hard. A.J. Dillon has declared himself the mayor of Door County. And I think if you yourself travel around Wisconsin, you're going to find bars, supper clubs with lots of Packer memorabilia. And a fortuitous find by Neil is what leads us to our Packer player of the past, Neil.
So I spent a week in Wisconsin in early June, and spending time fishing on a lake. And one of the things that I really like about Wisconsin is going to the various taverns and bars around the state, and especially ones that have a little bit of history. So we were staying up in Vilas County, St. Germain, and we went out for lunch at a place called the Sainer Pub, just a standard Wisconsin pub that serves food. And get inside, and I realized immediately there's a lot of strange Packers memorabilia here. There's the first thing, a future Packers player of the past. Sorry, Jeff. There's a big signed Robert Tonyan jersey. But it was a lot of things that were maybe not players who were quite as prominent, but players that we certainly remember. And so there was an endorsed cash check from Bob Skronsky. That was sort of the strangest bit of memorabilia. But on the wall next to where we were sitting was the photo that you see here. And it's a photo of the Packers linebacker, Mike Hunt, tackling Walter Payton with the signature.
Can we just call him Michael for this segment? Is that okay?
I may just say Mike, okay?
Mike,
we like the Mikes in Green Bay. So at any rate.
So yes, tell us about Mike Hunt, please.
John, I don't have that level of intimate knowledge, but the memorabilia was interesting. And it was certainly a player that we remember from our youth. And, I remember him being a guy that played it, had some big hits, but didn't last that long. And I didn't really know any of the backstory. We were, 8 years old at the time. But Mike, or Michael, if you prefer, was a Packers linebacker, but he started out born in Madison, actually, but went to high school in rural Minnesota, in Ortonville, Minnesota, which is almost in South Dakota. Mike, as a youth, liked to go fishing and hunting. He was basically a farm kid in the countryside, and he didn't even start playing football until his sophomore year in high school. But he was making a name for himself as an athlete, even as a freshman in hurdles. And so his senior year, he actually was second in state in the low hurdles and the high hurdles. It was his track that brought him to the attention of the University of Minnesota Gophers. And it was talking with football coaches while he was at its track state championship that apparently is what eventually led to them checking him out and then offering him a scholarship to the University of Minnesota. So Michael went to the University of Minnesota. He was a 3-year starter there as a linebacker. But the draft then wasn't the machine that it is now. And so once you finish your regular season or play the bowl game, as he played the Hall of Fame Bowl against the University of Maryland, if you wanted to get yourself out there, get yourself better known, to get a better draft pick, you had to sort of go out and promote yourself. And so he and a teammate from the University of Minnesota rented a car and drove to the Blue-Gray game where they played the Senior Bowl and the Challenge Bowl, which is a game between the Big Ten and the Pac-10, because there was no NFL Combine at the time. So it's basically give yourself as much time in front of those NFL scouts, and maybe they'll notice you, maybe you'll move up as far as the draft is concerned. And certainly he was. Michael was drafted in the second round for the Packers. He was 34th overall because the Packers were 4-10 the previous year. So they had the 6th pick in each round of the draft, 34th pick overall. So a very high draft pick for the Packers. And he was ecstatic to be drafted by the Packers because he was a small town kid. He thought Minneapolis was too much big city. And so Green Bay was kind of the perfect size place for somebody. And he made an impact immediately as far as getting noticed. One of the players who had been at Minnesota before him had been the starter at linebacker for the Packers, but he displaced him and was a starter basically from the preseason, started 15 of the 16 games in his rookie year, which is the 1978 season. Now, that 1978 draft also had some other really good players, most notably James Lofton, the 6th overall pick of the draft, but also some players who were stalwarts for the Packers for a long time, including John Anderson, who was picked at the end of the first round, Michael early in the second round, Estes Hood, a defensive back in the 3rd round, and then Mike Douglas, another linebacker in the 5th round. So you'll note they picked 3 linebackers with their first 5 picks of the draft and also a D-back. And so 1977, although they were 4-10, they were starting to build a decent defense. The Packers were actually 10th in points against out of the 28 teams in the league that year. So they had something. And it was partly because that 1977 draft had Mike Butler and Ezra Johnson, and there were some other good players from that 77 draft. So the thought is, okay, we've got this really strong defensive line. Now we are going to build up the linebacking core and have something that is going to be a future for this team. And that started out pretty well. So the Packers in that 1978 season, this is the 8-7-1 season that we've talked about before. The Packers started out 6-1 in that year. They started out 2-0. In their 3rd game of the year, they played the Oakland Raiders, who 2 years prior had won the Super Bowl. And although the Packers lost to the Raiders 28-3 in that game, the defense put on quite a show. The Ken Stabler was 6 of 15 for 72 yards and 4 interceptions that game, including 1 interception to Michael Hunt. Now, why did the Packers lose 28-3? Well, David Whitehurst was 10 of 28 for 87 yards, and the Raiders had 348 total yards of rushing. So we weren't perfect on defense, but this was a really, really good team. But that was our only loss in the beginning of the season. The Packers went on to 6-1 before losing to Minnesota and then finishing 1-5-1 over the last 7 games. But Michael did make a name for himself in those games. So specifically, Walter Payton complimented him. And after one of the times that Mike tackled him, Walter Payton said, "Good hit, man." So this, I got your sweetness. This is a dedication that was in the Sainer pub. That's to the Sainer pub. I got your sweetness. Mike Hunt, number 55, showing him tackling Walter Payton. So certainly something that was a highlight of his career in the end. He also had a fumble recovery in that first year. So the Packers overall in that 1978 season had quite an improvement. They had a really strong defense. That was the year of Ezra Johnson's huge number of sacks, 17 and a half sacks in that 1978 season. And so the Packers overall in that 1978 season were actually 8th in the NFL in points against versus 22 in points for. So that defense was starting to make a difference. And you think about where they were and how many young players they had on that defense, you would think that that is going to be a strength of the Packers for a long time. And unfortunately, for those of us who remember it, it decidedly was not. And part of that was because for some of those players, 78 was the peak, including Ezra Johnson. He never really reached that level ever again. But Mike, after coming off this really strong rookie year, got injured with a knee injury early into the 1979 season. So Eddie Lee Ivory started out the year in our number 1 draft pick, going down in Soldier Field in his first game. But Michael also only played 3 games that year. He did have an interception within that, but he also developed a problem with concussions and having headaches. And so the 1980 season comes along. His knee is fine, but he missed essentially the entire preseason due to having debilitating problems with headaches. Now, once the regular season came along, he once again was the starter. And so he played 3 games in that 1978 season. The first, that 12-6 Chester Markle blocked field goal touchdown over the Bears. He was involved in a loss against the Detroit Lions, but his last game in the end of his NFL career was a loss to the Los Angeles Rams in Los Angeles. And specifically in that game, he took a knee hard to the head. And basically the way he describes it is that he essentially blacked out. He had recurring, not just headaches, but he couldn't, he'd hear bells. He'd have noises that would exist constantly throughout that. As he described it, I got the worst end of the deal. And he even states that specifically he has problems remembering essentially anything that happened in 1980. In 1981, he was actually on the IR the entire season because of headaches and because of flickering in his eye. In 1982, he visited the Mayo Clinic, tried to make a comeback, and essentially was still having problems with headaches, and then got a big hit in the preseason. He just said, that's it. And so essentially because of concussions, he was only able to play 1 year in the NFL. Essentially played 22 games, started 20 of them. Somebody who was a really good player for a really short time, but this is obviously before we really knew the full extent of what concussions were. But even so, right, he missed essentially 2 full seasons that were purely due to concussion. So it's not that there was no recognition of how serious the problem was. It's just that he was one that suffered from it particularly poorly. So after his Packers career, he went into fastener manufacturing and fastener manufacturing sales. He started up a company back in his hometown of Ortonville, Minnesota. In 97, he moved to Green Bay to start a new fastener company. And in 2007, he moved to Maryland as the president of Central Wisconsin Fastener. So, and somebody who still loves the connection that he has to the Packers and loves the fact that there is all of this Packers lore. And Merrill is not that far away from Sainer, which is where I was. And so clearly he enjoys, as I said before, he enjoys the hunting, he enjoys the fishing, he enjoys things that are of the Wisconsin lifestyle, and going to a rural Wisconsin pub and then essentially taunting Walter Payton seems to be a really nice way to have people remember you. And so this is a case of a career that was essentially lost due to concussions. And, we think back to those teams from the late 70s, early 80s, and defense was not the strength. 78, we certainly do remember that, but they basically went from that 8th to 13th in 79, 22nd in 80, 20th in 81 as far as points against. And so they basically fell off the map, and it's partly due to injuries, but it's also partly due to them having some very poor drafts afterwards, including choosing Bruce Clark 4th overall in 1980, and some other poor drafts, including 1981, which may be the worst Packers draft ever, that started out with Rich Campbell and ended up picking Ray Stackowitz in the 3rd round as a punter. So it was kind of painful looking back at some of those old drafts. But Michael Hunt, certainly a name, a player that I remember having positive memories for, even though he didn't play for that long. I mean, John had picked out his name just from the picture when I texted it to him. So, there's definitely a situation where there's a could have, would have, as far as those Packers teams are concerned. And imagine if we had those Packers teams from the early 80s, except they had a defense. If John Anderson had bloomed the way that you might have expected, if Michael Hunt had not had the injuries, this is a case where we did not get as much out of those drafts in that time. And it's not because there weren't players there. In this case, we had a really good player, and unfortunately the concussions were the end of it. So, and he's actually been involved in the lawsuits against the NFL associated with concussions and treatments for concussions.
Well, and as you mentioned, in Merrill, I mean, he's 66 years old, alive and well, still in the area, running a business in Merrill. We're going to add his name to the wish list of former Packers that we want to get on the show and do a nice interview with.
Yeah, I love the taunting in the picture. I mean, it just sort of speak. And there was a good article in the Journal maybe 7 or 8 years ago in which they talked about his life, interviewed him, and it definitely seems like to be a really interesting person to talk to, and definitely takes and fully appreciates the Packers lore and the Packers mystique.
I'm going to throw this out there real quick, Neil, just because I know my parents watch our podcast, and I'll say I've already checked with my father-in-law, who does live in Merrill, Wisconsin, to see if he was familiar with Mike, and he said he had heard the name, but has not met him, does not know him. So unfortunately, we don't have a connection there yet, but that doesn't mean we aren't going to keep trying to work it. So there's lots of places in Wisconsin with memorabilia that are present and current that you can find things, but there's also a lot of historical places, standing sometimes, maybe not standing. But to tell us about one of those, Jeff has a bedtime story for us.
As we've talked about on this so far today, OTAs and things like that. So this bedtime story is about Rockwood Lodge, training camp that was ahead of its time, and was really an interesting part of Packer history. So Rockwood Lodge was built in the fall of 1937 by the Norbertine Fathers for its staff and community club members to relax and recreate along the shores of Green Bay. It's as you can see, it's in the picture here, it's a very large building, cross-shaped. It featured about 40 rooms and had very unusual or large features: entranceway, steeple, massive chimney, and a stone entrance gate. There were nearly 50 acres of pristine woods nearby. It was built with limestone excavated from the site. Inside the lodge contained a rustic fireplace, stage, balcony, grand staircase to upper-level rooms. Outside, a boat deck was added, along with tennis courts, baseball diamond, and an amphitheater. The Norbertines, back in the late 1930s, even rented the facility to the public for weddings, meetings, and banquets. So along comes Curly Lambeau, and he had an idea. And his idea was to purchase Rockwood Lodge and turn it into an off-site training site for his team to live, train, and bond. With the ending of World War II, and there were gas rations and there were other things, the Norbertines were ready to sell the property. And they, in mid-1946, they did in fact sell it to the Packers Corporation. Now, this was not a cheap investment. The lodge was purchased for $32,000, which was a very, very significant investment. And so once the building and the grounds were purchased, even more capital was needed to kind of change the facility or transform it for training camp. So regulation size practice field, for example, was constructed in front of the lodge. Remodeling to the interior for dressing rooms, equipment rooms, offices, and other rooms was needed. And this was at a pretty significant cost. Although it was very visionary by Curly Lambeau, it just financially almost ruined the Packers. So it opened up, they started having training camps there, and there were two kind of issues with it. The first is that it took the players out of Green Bay. Now, granted, it's not that far out of Green Bay, but it's still far enough out of the sort of the city center where, you know, the residents of Green Bay were just kind of used to seeing the Packer players at local bars and things like that. And so what happened was, so kind of the Green Bay public, you know, where did the players go? Oh, they're at Rockwood Lodge. Now, the other issue was the fact that the practice field was built basically on limestone, right? There was a very thin layer of grass, but basically they were playing on rock. And so the fans, or excuse me, the players actually called it shin splint special, and basically they called it the Rock. So it was a great place for the players, though, to bond, to kind of hang out. There were dorms, or there were areas for the single players. There were areas for the married players. They spent all their time together. So they all ate together. It was a very family atmosphere. And it was really kind of one of those things that again, in theory, was going to work. Practice field was lousy, and it took the players out of Green Bay. So Rockwood Lodge came to a very tragic end. So on January 24th, 1950, it burned to the ground during a freakish storm that came through Green Bay. Basically, it was thundering and lightning and snow and freezing rain and sleet. No official cause of the fire was ever determined. There were caretakers that were living there at the time in the off season, and unfortunately, those folks lost everything in the fire. The most likely cause was thought was faulty electrical wiring, but there is another more conspiratorial theory. And that theory is because at that time in the late 40s, the Packers as a team, they were awful. They were absolutely terrible. They were facing great financial pressure, and Rockwood Lodge was very, very expensive to maintain and things like that. So when the place burned to the ground on January 24th, 1950, the Packers collected $75,000 of insurance money. Now, it's interesting, as John mentioned earlier, there's no real existing, there's not a plaque, there's nothing that shows that this place ever existed. It's basically where Bayshore Park is now. It's there's a 100-foot limestone cliff that kind of overlooks. And so I was going back through this. I'm like, yeah, I kind of think I know where that is, having been to Bayshore Park, but there's really no trace of this place. However, there are two things that survived the fire. One of which was a green couch. That's been lost to history. But the other thing that did survive was a charcoal portrait of Curly Lambeau. Somehow this was removed during the fire. It survived, and it currently hangs in the Packer Hall of Fame boardroom.
Wow.
So kind of a strange, like I said, this is when, you know, the Packers were having training camp, and it was great for the team, but financially there was a lot of turmoil. This is when Curly Lambeau was right after the fire, not necessarily because of, but Curly Lambeau was fired after that. So this is a very tumultuous time. So Rockwood Lodge, the gorgeous, opulent Rockwood Lodge that the players loved living in, hated practicing there. There's no trace of it, even in Green Bay. That there's just not, other than pictures, obviously.
I'm saying we're doing a road trip. I can already hear that
Yeah.
this is going to happen. We got to seek out a couple of these places.
Well, we also
Yeah.
have to get Jeff a catchphrase, something to wrap things up, something, similar to, and now the rest of the story. So Jeff, we've got that to look forward to as well for our next season.
Excellent.
All right?
I'll get on it.
A great story, and like Neil said, certainly a lot of things in the Green Bay area and around the state to look at, to find. We still have a heritage trail to do, and
Yes.
we'll find things to do. It is the off season, and we are ready to get together in Green Bay. But until then, you guys, any other thoughts on the off season?
Well, Jeff, you mentioned the bonding, and that's actually been one of my favorite things this off season. Is of course there are the workouts, but there are all the photos of Christian Watson and these young receivers and Jordan Love out in Door County and just hanging out on boats, right? And this is not like the Minnesota boat crew or anything. Like, you got Simone Biles out there as well, because now we've got a Olympic champion, a gold medalist gymnast that's part of the Packers family. But it seems like these young players are having fun and they're getting to know each other. And it's just a different atmosphere as far as the players are concerned. We've said it before that this team being young is going to be a real opportunity this year. And I love seeing that our players are the ones that are having fun, because it's just sort of the Packers players having fun doesn't seem to be something that we normally would say. And this is great. This team is certainly doing the bonding, not doing it. They may be doing it out on the bay, but not doing it out in a limestone practice field out on the bay. So yeah, bonding's good. And they've been doing a lot of it this off season.
No, agreed. And like I said, I think with the improvements around Lambeau Field, with the upcoming shareholder meeting, with the announcement of the draft, I think Green Bay's got a lot to look forward to over the next couple of years off the field, and hopefully, like I said, on the field, it's a new era. Certainly, it's undeniable, and everybody's excited. I know I certainly am, and looking forward to. Even though we're in a kind of a lull here, I think we'll find stuff to do, report back, and look forward to football season.
And really, with what you said, Neil, with Simone Biles now being part of the Packer family, and the Lot 1 tailgating returning to Lot 1, we do have some of the player wives who are they hang out with our crew as well. So I hope that Devondre Campbell's wife makes friends with Simone, and then she starts hanging out in the Lot 1 crew. So I really got to start upping my playlist and get that ready for this season. All right. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe. It's free. Feel free to leave us a comment as well. You can always find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That's all one word. We are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and Spotify. Follow us at any or all of those spots. On Facebook, we are the GBC podcast, Green Bay Chat. And as always, may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.